In 1996, Marvel was in serious trouble. Their stock crashed 93.3%. Stock that used to be worth $35.75 had taken a nosedive, crashing all the way down to just $2.38. To make things worse, Marvel was drowning in $700 million of debt, about $1.3 billion if we adjust for today. Comic shops were shutting their doors left and right, and it seemed like Marvel's fate was sealed. But then one bold move turned everything around. Fast forward to today, Marvel's not just alive, it's a $150 billion empire. And in this video, I'm gonna take you behind the scenes to show how Marvel pulled the biggest gamble in Hollywood history. From a $700 million debt to a $150 billion powerhouse. It's the ultimate rags to riches story. So buckle up and let's dive in. By 1968, Marvel was on top of the world, selling around 50 million comic books every year, establishing an intense rivalry with DC Comics. Comic books were no longer just for kids. They became prized collector's items, with rare editions going for thousands of dollars in the 80s and the early 90s. It looked like Marvel's success would last forever. After all, they were publishing more limited edition comic books and fans were eating it up. But as we all know, that's exactly what bubbles look like just before they pop. In the early 90s, Marvel was riding high, selling tons of Spider-Man, X-Men, and Fantastic Four comics, and everything seemed golden. But then things took a sharp turn. A series of bad financial decisions and a string of questionable moves sent Marvel stock into a freefall. What was once a bright future quickly turned into a nightmare. In 1993, their stock was worth $35.75 per share. Just 3 years later, it dropped to a jaw-dropping $2.38. A complete collapse. Now, famous writer Neil Gaiman said, "You can sell lots of comics to the same person, especially if you tell them that you're investing money for high guaranteed returns. But you're selling bubbles and tulips, and one day the bubble will burst and the tulips will rot in the warehouse." Now, if you don't know what the tulip mania is, well, it's a strange period in the year 1634 when tulip bulbs suddenly became ridiculously valuable, only to have the whole market crash in 1637. Gaiman saw the same thing happening with comics, and sure enough, in 1993, the bubble finally burst. Marvel's sales plummeted by a shocking 70%, and by 1996, they were buried under $700 million in debt. The fall was brutal. Marvel had to lay off 1/3 of its employees. They couldn't even pay their paper suppliers, meaning they were literally too broke to print comics. And the industry, they didn't just doubt Marvel, they wrote them off as dead. But here's what you probably don't know. Marvel had already sold the movie rights to all their A-list characters. They sold the rights to the X-Men to 20th Century Fox in 1993 for just $2.6 million. They sold Spider-Man to Sony in 1999 for $7 million. And the film rights for the Fantastic Four were bought by a German company, Constantin Film, in 1992 for an amount so low it was never even disclosed. So all Marvel was left with were their B-team heroes. And yes, that includes the Avengers. Before the inception of the MCU with Iron Man 1, the Avengers in the comics mostly consisted of characters who were not mutants and were not popular enough on their own to sell their own comics. So when Marvel was going bankrupt, they started selling movie rights to their characters to various studios. But here's the thing, no one wanted the Avengers. Studios were only after the heavy hitters like Spider-Man, X-Men, and Fantastic Four characters. So what characters did Marvel actually have left? Well, things weren't looking great. Iron Man, who everyone thought was way too boring to make a good movie. Thor was seen as too complex to ever work on the big screen. Captain America was considered way too patriotic, especially for international audiences, and Black Widow was practically a nobody in mainstream culture. Basically, everyone wrote these characters off as worthless. They were the leftovers, the underdogs. Meanwhile, other franchises like Blade, X-Men, and Spider-Man were hugely successful in cinemas in the late 90s and early 2000s. But Marvel failed to negotiate a fair share of the profits. For example, Blade made $70 million in 1998, but Marvel only received a mere $25,000 from its success. And then there was Spider-Man. Tobey Maguire's first 2 films collectively earned nearly $1.5 billion, and yet Marvel only took home $62 million. That's when Marvel had enough. They made a bold decision. Instead of selling more rights, they decided to bet everything on creating their own films. Why? Because this way, they'd get to keep 100% of the profits. No more small slices of the pie. But there was one problem. They had no money. And that's when Marvel decided to make the biggest gamble in Hollywood history.
Not a great plan.
In 2005, Marvel convinced Merrill Lynch Investment Company and took out a loan of $525 million against the rights of the remaining characters. The only conditions were each movie's budget couldn't exceed $165 million and has to be PG-13. And if the movies failed, they'd lose everything. Wall Street called it a financial suicide, but there was one person who believed in Marvel, Kevin Feige. Kevin had started at Marvel as an intern back in 1999. By 2007, just 8 years later, he was the president of Marvel Studios. Now, with the giant loan now secured, all they had to do was make one hell of a first movie, which is easier said than done. The first step was choosing the right character. Marvel actually ran focus groups with kids, showing them a bunch of superheroes and asking which one they'd most want a toy out of. The answer turned out to be Iron Man. But here's the kicker, Marvel didn't even have the rights to Iron Man, Warner Brothers did. They had held onto the rights for nearly a decade, but never thought the character was worthy of a movie. Then by sheer luck, the rights expired just in time for Marvel to swoop in and grab them back. You see, when a studio buys movie rights, if they don't make a movie within a certain time frame, the rights revert back to the original owner, which is why Sony keeps on making Spider-Man films every 5 years. But that's a topic for another day. And that's exactly how Marvel got Iron Man back, just in time to kick off the MCU. Now, what's crucial for Marvel Studios was to make the audience fall in love with Tony Stark, the man behind the suit, more so than the sexy suit of armor. But there was another problem. The public outside the comic book community had no clue who Iron Man even was. Plus, casting Robert Downey Jr. was a bold and risky move. At the time, he wasn't exactly known for his clean-cut image. It was like Marvel was betting their last dollar on the slowest horse in the race. And what's even more shocking was that Iron Man didn't even have a full script when they started filming. They let Robert Downey Jr. improvise his scenes. In fact, Jeff Bridges, who played Obadiah Stane, later said that the whole film was probably saved by the improvisation skills of Robert Downey Jr. and director Jon Favreau. At this point, other studio executives thought Marvel was going insane. Cut to May 2nd, 2008, the day Iron Man finally hit theaters. At first, expectations were really low. Paramount's projection for the opening weekend was a modest 40 to 50 million. Even Marvel's own board thought the movie might just break even. But on Sunday evening, David Maisel, one of the producers, got a phone call at 6 p.m. saying that they were tracking $60 million for the weekend. And it didn't stop there. Every hour, the number jumped by 10 million. And by 10 p.m., the movie had already made $100 million. And that was just the opening weekend, a movie that had a budget of $140 million.
And Robert was just, every time that the call was made and the number kept going up, he was like, it's gonna hit 100. He was like, it's gonna hit 100. I'm like, oh God, why are you jinxing it? I'm just happy if it hits whatever it was supposed to hit. What was supposed to hit? I forget. But it was more than what we had projected what it was going to end up being.
Iron Man would go on to make a staggering $585 million worldwide. That's when Marvel realized that they had struck gold. The first film in the MCU was a roaring success, and suddenly the sky was the limit. But here's where the real genius came in. Instead of making random disconnected sequels, Marvel did something no one had done before. They created an entire universe of interconnected films. Characters would cross over, team up, and share storylines just like they did in the comic books. No one had ever attempted anything like that in cinema history. And the results? Bonkers, in the best way possible. After 34 interconnected movies, Marvel Studios has grossed over a whopping $31 billion worldwide, making it the highest grossing film franchise of all time. Sure, not every film was a smash hit, but the vast majority of them were massive successes, bringing in huge profits. Avengers Endgame's opening weekend was $1.2 billion, a figure that literally changed Hollywood forever. Endgame went on to become the highest grossing film in history, earning $2.8 billion, until Avatar got a re-release and reclaimed the title. But if you think about it, it was Iron Man that started this entire revolution. Iron Man still remains the biggest gamble in cinema history. With so much on the line, Marvel had no choice but to create a masterpiece. And on top of everything, Iron Man did something absolutely unprecedented. It broke the superhero mold. Usually superheroes keep their identities hidden. Think Superman, Batman, or Spider-Man. But in the final moments of Iron Man, Tony Stark did the unthinkable. He revealed his secret identity to the world. No hiding, no masks, just a bold, unapologetic declaration.
I am Iron Man.
This was something completely new. Audiences had never seen a superhero take off the mask like that before. We've always watched superheroes go to extreme lengths to protect their true selves, but here was Tony Stark, embracing his true identity, not hiding from it. He was even advised against it, but Tony Stark went ahead and did it anyway. And that level of badassery was unlike anything we've seen before in a superhero. And of course, RDJ's everlasting charisma was the cherry on top. He didn't just play Iron Man, he became him. RDJ embodied the character so much that the line between actor and superhero was nearly non-existent. Stan Lee, the creator of Iron Man himself, said it the best. That man was born to be Iron Man. Then came Disney in 2009 and bought Marvel for a hefty $4 billion. At the time, people thought Disney had overpaid, but producer Avi Arad saw it differently. He saw the potential. He knew that Marvel was destined to become the powerhouse it is today. And guess what? Today, Marvel generates that same $4 billion in a single year. And the so-called B-team heroes? Well, they're now worth more than Superman, Batman, and Spider-Man combined. Even the Disney Plus shows have racked up over 200 million views with hits like Loki, WandaVision, and Falcon and the Winter Soldier. And all of this came from characters that no one wanted. So how did Marvel do it? Well, it boils down to three simple formulas. One, they trusted their core assets when no one else did. While every studio out there passed on the Avengers, Marvel took a leap of faith. They gave Iron Man a shot, and it became one of the most iconic origin stories ever told. Two, they took calculated risks. It's obvious that such huge gambles come with major risks, but Marvel knew exactly what they were doing. They calculated each move, planning for potential failures and making sure they didn't happen. And three, they built long-term plans. David Mazel's idea to create interconnected stories where characters cross over like in the comics laid the foundation for Marvel's grand universe. Kevin Feige has said time and again that Marvel Studios always knows what they're gonna release 5 years ahead of time, ensuring every movie and show fits into the larger picture. This takes an insane amount of planning and dedication. And it's all made possible because Kevin Feige, the man in charge, is a comic book nerd himself, who knows every character inside out. And let's not forget the amazing writers like Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely, and directors like the Russo brothers, who helped turn Marvel Studios into what it is today. And here's the lesson we can take from all of this. When everyone tells you that your ideas are worthless, remember Marvel. They turned their worthless B-team heroes into the most valuable IP in cinema history. Your unique selling point might be hiding in plain sight, something others are completely overlooking. So before you head into the real world, think of Marvel. Look within yourself. Instead of dwelling on what you have lost, think about what you can do with what you have left. Instead of following the trend, become the trend. And that, my friend, is how Marvel went from $700 million in debt to building a $150 billion empire. Now lads, if you like this video, then please give me a thumbs up, grab the subscribe button and turn notifications on. Till then, I'm the Canadian lad, and I'll see you lads in the next one.